Russia's strategic entry into the ongoing conflict has not been a sudden move, but rather the result of years of geopolitical calculation, regional alliances, and the slow erosion of U.S. influence in key strategic zones. To understand why this shift matters, we must recognize that global power is not only measured by military presence, but also by economic leverage, diplomatic influence, and the ability to shape narratives. Russia understands this well. In recent years, it has steadily built relationships across the Middle East, offering what many countries view as an alternative to U.S. dominance. And now, as tensions rise, Moscow's involvement is no longer subtle nor silent. It is visible, deliberate, and deeply strategic. For decades, the United States positioned itself as the uncontested power broker of this region. It negotiated peace deals, financed military programs, influenced leadership changes, and placed itself at the center of every major geopolitical decision. But a new era is emerging. Russia's increasing presence signals that the world is moving toward a multipolar system where no single nation commands absolute authority. The Middle East is no longer a chessboard controlled by one power. It is a competitive arena, and Russia is stepping in not as a supporting actor, but as a power with its own ambitions and alliances. The balance has shifted quietly at first, now unmistakably. One of the core reasons Russia's involvement has such weight is its long-standing strategic relationship with several regional powers, most notably Iran and Syria. These alliances were not formed overnight, but through shared opposition to Western intervention and a mutual desire to protect regional autonomy. Through military cooperation, coordinated intelligence networks, and economic agreements, Russia has built strong and resilient partnerships that give it influence where others only have access. And influence is far more powerful than presence. Influence shapes decisions before they are made. Influence turns conflict into opportunity. Influence changes outcomes without showing force. This shift puts Israel in a more complex and uncertain position. For years, Israel relied on predictable power structures. The United States was the guarantor, the shield, the strategic partner. But the entrance of Russia introduces variables that Israel cannot ignore. Moscow does not act impulsively. It acts with long-term strategic interest. Every diplomatic statement, every weapons deal, every military advisor, every negotiation behind closed doors carries the weight of a broader plan. And Israel now finds itself facing a geopolitical environment where its adversaries are no longer isolated. They are supported, coordinated, and emboldened by a global power. This is where the pressure begins, because when multiple powers align against a single strategy, the effects are not just military, they are psychological, diplomatic, and economic. Israel must now calculate its moves within a broader context, aware that every strike, every negotiation, every public statement may influence relationships far beyond its borders. The conflict is no longer about local security, it is about geopolitical survival. And yet, we must recognize a deeper layer beneath the military and diplomatic maneuvers. Global conflicts are rarely about ideology alone. They are about access to resources, control of trade, dominance over energy markets, and the shaping of regional leadership. The Middle East holds some of the most valuable energy reserves in the world, and whoever influences the region influences global energy prices, trade routes, and political stability. Russia understands this dynamic intimately. By strategically positioning itself, it gains leverage not only in the region, but across global markets. In economic terms, this is not just a military alignment, it is a strategic investment. Perhaps the most critical element of Russia's involvement is how it alters the psychological landscape of the conflict. When a superpower signals support, confidence shifts, strategies change, risks feel smaller, the possibility of escalation becomes more acceptable. This is the quiet power that shapes wars long before armies move. And while the world observes troop movements, missile launch reports, and televised statements, The real transformation is happening in boardrooms, diplomatic summits, intelligence exchanges, and energy negotiations. Wars are not only fought on battlefields, they are fought in balance sheets, supply chains, alliances, and narratives. Russia's strategic entry is a reminder that global power is not about who has the most weapons. It is about who controls the environment in which decisions are made. The conflict is no longer isolated, it is interconnected, and every player now understands that the stakes are far greater than territory or defense. The stakes are global influence, and influence is the most valuable currency of power. Israel is now experiencing a form of pressure it has not faced in decades, a multi-front, multi-layered, and deeply coordinated challenge that reshapes how its military and government must operate. In the past, Israel often confronted one primary adversary at a time. Conflicts were contained, controlled, and strategically predictable. But the situation today is fundamentally different. The alliances forming against it are broader, more strategic, and backed by powerful international stakeholders. This is not simply a battlefield scenario. It is a geopolitical tightening of the circle. When pressure comes from many sides, defense becomes reaction instead of strategy. On one front, Israel faces rising tension with regional resistance movements that have grown more experienced, more organized, and more technologically equipped over the years. These groups are no longer disconnected or operating independently. They share intelligence, supply routes, communication structures, and ideological alignment. And behind them stand state actors who are increasingly willing to coordinate politically and militarily in ways that were once considered unlikely. When separate forces begin acting as one, a conflict transforms from manageable to unpredictable. At the same time, Israel is contending with internal tensions, economic strain, political division, and societal fatigue. Wars are not fought only with weapons. They are fought with national unity, financial strength, and public support. When a nation faces domestic pressure while confronting multiple external fronts, every decision carries greater weight and greater risk. A single miscalculation can shift public confidence, diplomatic leverage, or military momentum. Israel knows this. Its leadership understands that the battlefield today is not confined to borders. It stretches into media, negotiation rooms, embassies, and financial markets. What makes this moment especially significant is the increasing coordination among nations that historically acted independently. Iran strengthens regional allies, Syria provides geographic depth, Lebanon grants proximity, and others offer logistical networks, strategic geography, and political cover. Each of these elements alone would not be enough to shift regional power dynamics, but combined, they create a network of pressure that is both resilient and adaptive. Pressure does not break systems instantly. It reshapes them slowly, steadily, and irreversibly. This multi-front pressure also forces Israel to rethink its military doctrine. Previously, Israel relied on rapid offensive action to neutralize threats before they gained momentum. But when threats originate from multiple directions, strike at different times, and are backed by long-term external support, overwhelming force is no longer a final solution. Instead, the conflict becomes prolonged, strategic, and psychologically draining. The longer a conflict lasts, the more economic resources are consumed, morale shifts, alliances are tested, and international opinion evolves. Time becomes a battlefield of its own. There is also a diplomatic dimension that cannot be ignored. Countries across the region are watching closely, not only to see who wins battles, but to see who gains influence. Nations are positioning themselves carefully, waiting to understand which side of history yields the most advantage. Some states speak openly in support, others act quietly, but all recognize that the balance of power in the Middle East is being rewritten. And when the balance of power shifts, every nation adjusts its strategy, partnerships, and long-term goals. No government wants to be aligned with a weakening side, yet the most profound change may not be military or diplomatic, it may be psychological. When a nation realizes its adversaries are more connected than previously believed, its confidence must adjust. Uncertainty enters decision-making. Caution replaces dominance. Questions replace assumptions, and in geopolitics, uncertainty is itself a form of pressure. It influences how leaders negotiate, how generals plan, how markets react, and how populations perceive stability. Israel now finds itself in a position where its actions do not only determine outcomes in the present, they shape alliances, narratives, and power alignments for years to come. Every move is being watched globally. Every strike is interpreted politically. Every negotiation sends signals far beyond the region. The world is no longer responding to Israel's actions. It is calculating them. The conflict has shifted from a localized struggle to a regional power recalibration, and Israel stands at the center of the transformation. The pressure is not simply military. It is strategic, diplomatic, economic, and psychological. And pressure of this scale does not merely challenge a nation, it reshapes its future. The United States now finds itself in one of the most difficult strategic positions it has faced in the Middle East in decades. For generations, American foreign policy rested on a simple, unwavering principle: Israel would always receive full political backing, military support, and strategic protection. It was a guarantee, a pillar of U.S. influence, and the foundation of its position in the region. But today, that certainty is weakening. The world has changed, global power has shifted, and the U.S. must now make decisions under conditions where every choice carries consequences beyond the battlefield. When a superpower hesitates, the world notices. The United States is balancing multiple pressures at once. Economically, it is managing inflationary strain, increasing national debt, and growing dissatisfaction within its own population regarding foreign military spending. Politically, the U.S. is entering an era of domestic polarization, where public opinion no longer fully supports endless foreign interventions. Social priorities are shifting inward toward healthcare, education, infrastructure, and jobs. This means every dollar spent on a foreign conflict now demands justification. War is no longer automatically accepted as a strategic necessity. It is a debate, a calculation, a risk. Meanwhile, on the global stage, the U.S. faces rising competition. Russia is becoming more assertive, especially in regions where it sees strategic opportunity. China is advancing economically and diplomatically, developing trade partnerships and political influence that challenge American dominance. The United States is no longer the sole power capable of shaping outcomes abroad. The world is moving toward a multipolar structure, a landscape where strategic decisions become more complex because they are no longer unilateral. A move in one direction triggers reactions in multiple regions simultaneously. This makes the situation surrounding Israel profoundly more difficult for Washington. If the U.S. provides full-scale support, military deployments, additional weapons systems, intelligence coordination, and financial backing, it risks deepening conflict with Russia and heightening tension with China. It risks opening a broader conflict that could spread far beyond the Middle East. But if the United States reduces its support or slows its involvement, even slightly, it sends a signal to the world that its influence is weakening. Allies watch, rivals take advantage, and balance shifts. This is the bind of empire. Act, and you risk escalation. Stay cautious, and you risk decline. Israel has always depended on the United States not only for weapons, but for diplomatic protection. The U.S. shielded Israel in international forums, negotiated ceasefires, influenced regional relationships, and ensured access to the most advanced military technologies. But at this moment, Washington must consider whether it can continue providing this level of commitment without undermining its broader strategic goals. And that question is not easily answered. The world is also responding differently now. Nations in the Middle East see that the U.S. is no longer the single unquestioned power. They see Russia engaging more deeply. They see China building economic ties, including energy partnerships that shift the balance of influence. This new reality means that regional actors feel less pressure to align with American policy. They have alternatives. When nations gain options, alliances become negotiable. At home, U.S. leadership must also consider public perception. The American population has grown more skeptical of long wars and foreign interventions that offer little visible benefit to everyday citizens. The memory of Iraq, Afghanistan, and years of costly conflict lingers. Every new commitment must now be justified not by ideology, but by tangible national interest. And in this moment, defining that interest is not simple. This is where the stakes rise. Because if the United States miscalculates, if it either overcommits or undercommits, the consequences will not remain contained. Global markets respond to instability. Energy prices react instantly. Alliances shift quietly but permanently. And confidence in leadership, in strategic direction, in power, can be lost faster than it is gained. This is the unseen battlefield many people never witness. A battlefield of influence, negotiation, risk, and credibility. The United States is no longer determining the pace of conflict. It is responding to it, and a superpower in a reactive position is a superpower under pressure. Every decision Washington makes now will shape not only the trajectory of this conflict, but the future of its role in the world. The question is not whether the U.S. can act. The question is how, and whether its choices strengthen its position or reveal the limits of its reach. The Middle East now stands in a moment where the distance between tension and full-scale regional war has become dangerously thin. The situation is no longer defined by isolated strikes or border confrontations. It is shaped by alliances, long-standing grievances, shifting power dynamics, and a global environment where every strategic move triggers ripple effects across continents. When nations begin aligning militarily, economically, and politically under shared interests or shared threats, the landscape of conflict expands. Wars do not escalate because one side wants destruction. They escalate because no side is willing to appear weak. Across the region, signals of potential expansion are visible not only in military movements, but in diplomatic posturing and the tone of public messaging from governments and media outlets. Countries are positioning themselves carefully, almost cautiously, as if waiting for clarity on the outcome of the next major exchange. Every capital, from Ankara to Tehran, from Riyadh to Cairo, understands that a shift in the balance of power here does not remain confined to borders. It influences energy markets, trade agreements, security alliances, and global diplomatic strategy. The Middle East is not just a region of political tension. It is a strategic corridor of global value. Approximately 1/3 of the world's oil supply and some of its most crucial maritime trade routes sit directly within the zone of potential escalation. When this region becomes unstable, global markets respond immediately. Prices rise, supply chains tighten, the world economy becomes nervous, and when economies become nervous, leaders are forced to act, sometimes strategically, sometimes reactively. Economic pressure can spread a conflict faster than bullets. We must also recognize the role of identity, history, and narrative in this environment. Conflicts in the Middle East are not only geopolitical, they are deeply connected to cultural memory, religious symbolism, and national identity. When these elements enter a conflict, negotiation becomes more difficult. For many actors in the region, backing down is not just a political decision. It is seen as a betrayal of identity, of history, of dignity. And when conflict becomes about identity, the stakes rise beyond rational calculation. Countries that once avoided involvement may now find themselves compelled to choose sides, not because they seek confrontation, but because neutrality becomes politically costly. A government that appears passive while its allies are under threat risks losing credibility at home and respect abroad. And in international politics, Credibility is currency. It shapes alliances. It influences negotiations. It determines who leads and who follows. This moment is also defined by the presence of external powers whose interests extend far beyond regional boundaries. Russia sees strategic opportunity. China seeks economic stability and secure trade routes. The United States attempts to maintain its influence while managing pressure both domestically and globally. When global powers engage, even indirectly, the scale of conflict evolves. Every move becomes a message. Every alliance becomes a signal. Every silence becomes a statement. What makes this situation uniquely volatile is that escalation no longer requires a deliberate full-scale declaration of war. It only requires one strike interpreted as too aggressive, one border incident perceived as intentional, one political speech understood as a threat. History has shown that great wars often begin not with grand decisions, but with miscalculations. When multiple militaries are on high alert, when governments are under internal pressure to project strength, and when alliances create an expectation of response, a single unexpected event can trigger a chain reaction. There is also a psychological dimension that must not be overlooked. Populations across the region are increasingly aware, increasingly vocal, and increasingly emotionally invested. Public sentiment has become a driving force of political action. Social media amplifies outrage faster than diplomacy can respond. Leaders who fail to match public sentiment risk losing authority. Leaders who follow public pressure risk making decisions driven by passion rather than strategy. The battlefield is no longer only physical, it is emotional, digital, and political. The Middle East stands in a moment where stability depends not on strength alone, but on restraint. Yet restraint is the rarest commodity when nations feel surrounded, threatened, or challenged. The potential for broader conflict is not hypothetical. It is practical, visible, and measurable in the movements, statements, alliances, and responses we are already seeing. The region is not simply tense, it is primed. And when a region is primed, all it takes is the smallest spark to change the course of history.